Welcome to the Growth Enablement Madness podcast, and I'm Jim Ward, your host, CEO of BrainCell, the growth enablement company. I'm absolutely mad about helping businesses grow and scale. And in this podcast, my team and I get a chance to talk shop with industry thought leaders about a variety of growth enablement strategies, stories, and technology trends. I'm happy that you're here, so let's get the growth conversation started. Welcome, everybody. This is Jim Ward. I'm CEO of BrainCell, and this is the Growth Enablement Madness podcast, where we're mad about growth and scale of all the companies that we work with and all the companies that may be listening today on this or of this podcast. I don't know if it's of and I don't know. We'll figure it out later. We have a great guest today and something I'm very passionate about, that I have been passionate about. Her name is Christina Wodtke. Did I say it right, Christina? Close enough? Wodtke. And I also want to just point out, this is her, can you all see this book? Is it visible? Yes. And it's called Radical Focus by Christina. It is Achieving Your Most Important Goals with Objectives and Key Results. So it's about OKRs. Christina, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what other books? Have you written any other books too?
Oh, I have written a few other books. Yeah. I wrote very way back in the 2000s, wrote information architecture blueprints for the web. I had a design background until I became an entrepreneur and then was acquired by LinkedIn, and that's when I moved over into product. And so as well as Radical Focus, I wrote a book on drawing for product managers and business folks. Pencil me in. Dan Rome actually was kind enough to write a foreword. And I also have Team That Managed, which is about effective teams. My latest book is Present Yourself with Danielle Barnes. It comes from my work with Women Talk Design, which was a social good company that I helped found with Danielle.
By the way, folks, if you can go to Christina's LinkedIn and make sure you expand where it says all experiences, you're going to see a very bright person who's been doing a lot of things. I was very impressed with your LinkedIn and all the experiences you've had. But tell me a little bit about how you got here in this OKR world.
Sure, no problem. Basically, I had been exposed to OKRs at Zynga, and Zynga was a John Doerr company. So, of course, all of the companies from John Doerr were encouraged to use OKRs, and it was incredibly effective. I was kind of blown away how well it would allow people to make their own decisions that was effectively aimed at the good of any given group. So when I quit Zynga, I was doing some consulting, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So I was kind of taste testing different companies. And there was a startup, and they were just having the worst time figuring out what to do and sticking with it. They'd come up with this great strategy, and then they'd get distracted. So I suggested they use OKRs, because I was like, oh, this is good. And it really helped them. And then I did the same thing, and it was, maybe I should write this down so other people can take advantage of it. And that's when I wrote Radical Focus.
Very interesting. So the interest was sparked by being at a company that was a John Doerr company. When you say a John Doerr company, did he own the company?
Oh, no, he's an investor.
He's an investor,
he's on the board.
I see.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
yeah.
Okay.
Just that's how we tend to refer to it.
Right.
Speaking of your LinkedIn profile, Christina, you describe yourself on there as a curious human. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
I just always like that phrase because I'm curious. Curiosity, I think, is a magical emotion. You know, whenever you get angry or you get sad, but if you suddenly become curious about the situation, you can attack it with a lot more sense and calmly get rid of some of the negative emotions. So I love it for that reason. I love curiosity because I love learning things all the time. And I'm just a human. You know, we could talk about you're going to be your role somehow. Your identity is PM or your identity is designer. I think your identity is human. So I put them together, and then I get to say both I am curious, but also I'm a bit odd. I am curious.
You know, in my interviews, I do have my own question at the end, and it is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? Mm-hmm. And I always tell folks, weird is not a negative term, in my opinion. So I'm often getting some pretty interesting answers.
Well, that is good.
Yeah. So by the way, here's that What Matters for folks out there, John Doerr. And, that's what started my curiosity. It's funny, as an aside, and it has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about over the next 15 minutes, I was watching some somebody talk about there's only 4 emotions. There's mad, glad, sad, and scared. And each one of those have a volume knob on them. So I was talking about curiosity. I'm also a curious human. And when I heard that, it really resonated, right? And I thought, well, why am I anxious today? Which is really off the fear side. So really, what am I afraid of? Because the anxiety is coming out as a volume. And I was able to, with the curiosity, break it down to 2 things, which was really helpful to me to start to manage each thing separately rather than having a pile of anxiety that you don't know how to separate. Does that make sense, what I just said? Is that
100%? No, curiosity is definitely a magic emotion, like I said.
Yeah,
so that
magic
all made sense to me. As long as you stayed curious, you didn't get caught up in all the intensity of emotion. So,
right?
awesome.
Right. Well, so we're going to talk a little about the OKR framework. Can you just describe to us a little bit about, from your perspective, what OKRs are and, how you use them with teams and how do you methodically tackle significant goals through OKRs? Just a kind of a description of what an OKR is and things like that.
Sure. I mean, first of all, it is an acronym. And so I think there's people out there probably like, but it's just a format for setting a goal, which has both a qualitative and quantitative side. Qualitative is the dream, the objective. What do we want to see happen? And then the KRs are, how do we measure the success of that thing we want to see happen? The key results, numbers that change, that are out in the world, not tasks, not things to do. It's for your roadmap. So basically that's a rough way to set it up. But then the real value, I think, comes out of afterwards living them. Every Monday you say, this is what I'm doing towards the OKR set. Every Friday, celebrating the things that went right. Once again, Monday learning, setting. The cadence is the part that is really critical. And I know there's a lot of different approaches. I might say the radical focus approach is to have very few, preferably one OKR set, and then pay attention to it twice a week. Monday when you set your goals and Friday when you celebrate your wins.
And celebrating the wins, are you talking about, do we have a beer?
Yeah. I used to just say, of course, you're going to have beer. But then it turns out that lots of different companies have lots of different cultures. And so, if you're working with a company that's a little more, I would want puritanical, perhaps, maybe is the right word, I think, or just doesn't want to bring alcohol into the office, which some people just don't want to do. So you can have some cake, have a bunch of fresh fruit, have a board game hour, something, knowing your culture, something that says this, we're celebrating, we remember that we're human beings. So there's 1,000 reasons not to do beer, but there's also lots of companies, and I work in a startup, so there's lots of companies that are going to do beer, and it's all good.
Right. And I know beer pong is huge, right? I don't know. Maybe not.
Drinking games terrify me, so I can't.
Oh, you're right. They terrify me too there, Christina. Not really. So I'm getting my personality out there. So can you tell me, I've read John Doerr's book. Does your approach, radical focus, differ from his approach?
I think it differs a lot in the thing I was just speaking about, where we're talking about outputs and outcomes. So the phrase that people are banding about is outcomes over output, and that simply means pay attention to the results. You could be shipping feature after feature after feature, and it would have no value whatsoever. And those are considered outputs. The only question is, are you moving a number that's important to the health of the business? So I think that's where, if you look at the examples in my book and examples in his book, you'll see that mine are all very carefully all outcomes and not outputs. Well, he has more of a blend. And this is why I feel it's dangerous, is you don't want to be shipping for shipping's sake.
Right. That's interesting. And of course, it's funny that you'd say outcomes. We're an outcome-based company. So what we want to deliver to our clients as a growth enablement company is outcomes, right? Probably 5 years ago or more, I shifted our strategy from being a reseller to being an outcome-based company. Stop selling software seats. Start thinking about how do you create outcomes. I've even thought about bringing OKRs into our consulting group, which allows us to continue to measure after we have sold an outcome-based project to measure whether they're staying on track to get the true outcome. Anyways, topic for another day. And maybe you'll get fascinating. Good. I'm glad. By the way, I want to tell everybody, as you go look at the LinkedIn, you're a full-time lecturer at Stanford. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I used OKRs in a very strange way when I originally quit Zynga. I was really burned out. I'd been upper management in a bunch of places, Yahoo, MySpace, LinkedIn, and I was so burned out. And so I thought, okay, I need to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. So I thought I'll set an OKR set because I know what the result is. I just don't know how to get to it. And so I said, what my goal was to live a happy life doing only things I do for free. And then I had a numerical number, how much revenue, all that good stuff. And just every single week, I would try to run some experiment towards figuring that out. And I eventually went from wanting to be a food blogger type to wanting to be a teacher. The teaching I really fell in love with. And then I taught at California College of Arts. And one day my friend Julie said, hey, they got a job at Stanford. Shall I go to it? And I thought, there's no friggin' way. They're not going to hire me. I can't even imagine. But my policy is why not? It's, why not? It won't cost anything to try. And it worked out.
What's the risk? That's what we say in here.
Yeah,
what's the risk?
Yeah, exactly. I just want to go back to, you mentioned focus, Christina, and that really resonates with me because we're here at Brain Cell on our own journey of creating OKRs. And when we first started with the leadership team, each of us had created like 4 to 5 objectives and then like 3 to 4 key results under that. And it quickly became very overwhelming. And so can you talk a little bit about the value of focus and keeping that in mind as you're rolling out an OKR strategy?
Oh, you did a pretty good job just there.
I guess you're going to Stanford. Sarah, congratulations, you're in.
Bring her over. Bring her over. So the thing is, when we first learn goals, they're not in our long-term memory yet. They're in our working memory. And so you want to be able to keep them in your mind when you're working on various projects. Like, why am I doing this project? What decision can I make about its functionality or its look and feel based on what my outcomes that I want to have are? So the simpler they are, the more likely they are to be remembered, right? So if you could just have one OKR set, which is the single most important thing, that's going to be much more likely to actually happen and not forget. So the way we remind people is that cadence, that every Monday, like, what is at least one thing you're doing towards the OKRs, if not more? And that Friday celebration saying, remember, this is our goals. Look, we're closer. There are going to be groups that don't work with OKRs. That's a question I always get is, what about the people who can't contribute to the singular OKR? Honestly, I think they could set their own OKR for being the kind of company that can have success, or they could potentially just have KPIs that they monitor over time. It's a matter of, can you always be pushing to a next level of excellence, especially if you don't have a lot of control over how you spend your time. Like a design team rarely owns any other time. It's always in service to another group. But OKRs are beautiful with product groups. And I would say that's the place where you're going to get the most results from them.
When you say product groups, what do you mean by product groups?
Oh, I'm sorry. I know language is a mess, isn't it? It's a multidisciplinary group who is responsible for delivering value to the customer.
Got it. So in the software world, it would be somebody's actually creating the user interfaces, things of that nature. Is that what we're talking about? Product?
It would be a team. The OKR is going to be really effective at that team level. So in the software world, it would be an engineer, a product manager, and a designer. I always think of that as the core. I think Teresa Torres refers to it as the product trio, because then you're handling, can we make money? That's the product manager. Can we make people happy? And designers are often interested in that. And can we even build this thing, which is the engineer? And then you can add on things like QA, et cetera, et cetera. The product team has everything they need to make real impact. And if a designer is in a design group, they don't have everything they need. They don't have somebody who knows the business. They don't have somebody who can build the software. So it's really hard for them to control their outcomes because they don't have enough skills to make that happen.
Well, that makes me wonder about how we're using these OKRs internally. So it is not a product group. It is based on company objectives. And let's just make it simple. And it's for me in the annual, there's an annual growth objective and there's key results that we see, such as pipeline or sales. And then there's going to be an L2 for the leadership and then an L3 for the rest of the team. Is it going to still work for us? Is that something that's still applicable? Or do you think it's not well positioned for what I'm trying to use it for?
Well, I don't fully understand what you're doing, of course, but I think the questions you can ask to figure out if it's working is, does this group who are agreeing to this particular OKR set, do they have everything they need to make it happen? And that's the question. And if they do, it's probably a fine OKR.
Okay.
And if they don't have the resources, it just won't work. I was just thinking about the slight exception, which is sometimes companies get so big that they have sort of a team, members of the team who actually serve that group, like DevOps, product ops, design ops, and those kinds of, once you have your own resources that you could set against a goal, like say making a style guide, then you could probably do it. But when you're small, I think when you're small, that matters is the company OKR, really.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that's where you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And we're small, right? We're a $14 million company, which is small. So that's why we're trying to use it here. It resonated with me when I started to read about OKRs. And we're going to talk a little bit about the power of bold goals now. What are bold goals? And why are they important?
Well, you could call them big bets. We could call them stretch goals. But I'm a big fan of making your OKRs have some kind of stretch to them.
Okay.
You need to be brave enough. At the very beginning, when I first started doing this, I was sort of the ruthless Silicon Valley type. And I was like, you have to ask for ridiculously high goals, and then you have to make them anyway. And after working with lots and lots of companies and growing a little bit older, I think you have to think about what kind of stretch goal makes sense to set. Because I've noticed that some people, there's so little psychological safety in their company or maybe their past job, they might have gotten held to numbers they couldn't possibly meet. For those folks, I suggest a stretch goal that's like a yoga stretch. I don't know if you've ever done yoga.
Yes.
But every time I've done it, the teacher said, move until you feel the stretch. But if it hurt, back off a little bit. And so I think that a lot of the numbers, when you're very first trying to work in an outcome-based way, you need to say, okay, I know I can make this. Can I just tiny yoga stretch, just a little bit more, just to see what's possible, just to see what you're capable of. On the other hand, every so often you have to make an insane bet, a bold bet, like you said. And in that case, it's not going to be a yoga stretch. It's going to be, we don't even know how big this could be, but here's our guest and we're putting a stick in the ground. So I guess that's a yoga stretch versus your bold bets.
It's going to hurt a little bit.
Is there ever a risk of the bet being too bold that it actually becomes demotivating to the team?
I think the thing that's hard about the stretches is always going to be that they will demotivate you if it's impossible, you know, and most people know what's impossible. So people have to actually actively agree to the number, and you can't force them. It shouldn't be forced upon them. That's how we got into the Volkswagen problem with the diesel engine, is they were handed down numbers that were ridiculous. And then we saw the same thing with Wells Fargo scandal. So there's a big cost for imposing something ridiculous on people. They'll find a way to do it. But if you can get people to say, okay, this is where I'm comfortable. Okay, can I make you feel a little uncomfortable, but not doomed, you know? And that's the sweet spot. And it's actually very small. It's sort of like on your car, you know, it's in the green, then there's a tiny yellow, then it's in the red. Yeah. You always want to be in that yellow, but it can be a little tricky to get yourself there. So if you have to decide, lean green rather than red, because you don't want to burn people out.
Well, you brought up the color coding, so I'm going to just go there for a second. How do you score your OKRs? I've seen 0 to 1. I think Google uses that scoring methodology. Some use red, yellow, green based on some form of score. How do you score your progress against objective and key results?
Well, like I said, I started out being it either happened or it didn't happen, but that is demotivating. It's depressing. So for quite a while now, it's been how close did you get? You know, 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Some are going to be binary, like I either get a book published or I don't get a book published if that was one of my key results. Okay. But most of the time, I just take that confidence number and say, okay, this is how far we got.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, but we haven't talked about confidence. That's one way that my methodology is so different.
Tell us.
Well, a lot of people will do progress. How close are we to something? And instead, I prefer to use the idea of confidence, which is, okay, how confident is everybody, each individual person, that we're going to make these OKRs? And we look at each KR and we say, I'm about a 70% confident, or I'm 20% confident, you know, 2 out of 10, 7 out of 10. And that leads to a conversation. Like, why have you lost confidence? Why do you have a jump in confidence? Yeah. Progress is not as powerful as it just shows you you're working. It doesn't show you you're going to make impact. So I prefer that. And it is used for talking, it's not a perfect measure, obviously. It's a little bit finger in the wind, close enough.
Okay. So confidence. Got you. You had one here that I saw that you were going to ask about. Maybe you already asked about psychological safety.
I did, but I have a follow-up question. So with people on your team, are there tips to encourage them? Because I think for a lot of people, human nature is you don't want to fail. You're afraid of failure, right? So you don't want to stretch maybe as much as you need to stretch because you're afraid of failure and you want to kind of ensure that you're hitting your numbers. So are there tips beyond just like a little yoga stretch to get people to be comfortable enough to make those bold bets?
Yeah, and be motivated, right?
Absolutely. Something a lot of people don't realize is that everything you do is sending a message, right? Your actions are always sending a message. And as you become higher up the hierarchy, the smaller things you do, the more the message is given. So as a leader of any sort, you have to really think about what are the messages I'm sending out. So if somebody says this number dipped, are you going to be like, what the fuck? What's wrong with you? Or are you going to be, tell me more? I'm being curious, bring in that magic emotion. When people talk, you have to practice actually listening to them, and you can do anything you can to it, because a lot of times we're not actually listening, we're waiting to speak. And so you have to practice that, right?
Sarah.
And you have to allow people to be human beings who are fallible with you. And the way you do that is you be authentic and you be even vulnerable. And I don't mean, I don't know, weeping openly, but just, oh, I'm really not certain we're going to make these key results. This particular one, what do you think? And then you listen, go, is there anything else you want to say about it? Because I'm here, and it's like really get people to talk. And just over time, it'll sort itself.
So what I liked about OKRs was it had a top-down, bottom-up feel. And I'm hoping I've gotten this right as I think about it. We're going to L3s next, which is the rest of the group. Do you prescribe to the concept that they're going to write out what they believe against what the L1 OKRs are, that they're going to write their own, or are they going to have is it about talking? Tell me a little bit about how we get to that L3 OKR.
Well, are we talking about individual OKRs?
Yes. Individuals who will have their own OKRs a part of, let's say there's an account manager on the ERP side or an account manager on the CRM side, or there's a consultant who's in the consulting group. Each would have probably things that they can do to get to the L1 annual OKR, which in our case will be growth, to support it, to get us there. Am I thinking right that they're going to be writing out their own?
I usually don't recommend OKRs at the individual level, just because the OKRs are really good for getting people to work together. It's just another level of mental overhead for them. I think having the company and their L2 group seems like about the right complexity. You can hold that much information in your head, so when you have to make a decision, you'll make a decision based on that. There also might be tensions between the individual OKR and the group OKR. I just haven't seen it be successful, and I've seen it create a lot of dismay. The place I have seen it work is when you have somebody who is in control of their outcomes. So if you had a sales number, you're in control of your outcomes. If you were a growth hacker hired just to hire an SEO, you don't need anybody else, at which point I can see setting an OKR. But I'd start simple. Start just with a company for a quarter, then add your L2s for another quarter if you feel like you're getting it, and then bring in the last level if you think you're ready and you're happy with the other two levels. Going slow is the way to go. That way the organism does not reject the new process.
Yeah, so we don't get organ rejection.
Yep, exactly.
Got it. That's interesting. So we'll have to rethink that, Sarah, as we go through the L3s. So role of leadership, how do I keep them all focused? How do I inspire them? What's the things that I would be able to do? Maybe have some anecdotes about overcoming some challenges from a leadership perspective.
Oh, yeah. So again, you always have to be talking about them. You have to repeat yourself endlessly. My old boss, Jeff Weiner, always said, when you're tired of saying it, people are starting to hear it. And he would cheerfully repeat himself.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the one. So what I like about either using some kind of tool like email or Slack or more formal OKR tool, if you felt like it, to be boasting every Friday about this, and before you do the boasts, the CEO should say, remember folks, we are doing this, this, and this. These are our OKRs. And every Monday, remember folks, these are our OKRs. It's about touching them again and again and again until they're moved from short-term memory to long-term memory.
Becomes top of mind.
Indeed.
I guess. Yeah. So it's like marketing, repetition.
You have to repeat yourself to death.
Yes. Because that is part of what I think we're not doing right now as I reflect on it. And we're just learning, and we're still learning, right? And part of this podcast is for not only us to learn from you, but for the audience to continue their education. All right. I wanted to get through, we kind of got through setbacks. How about embracing failure? Why failure is not a risk, but a valuable learning opportunity is something I think you talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who say this, of course, but I like to think about things more in experiments and less about failure more and more. Failure just has a lot of depression around it, right? Like a lot of people think that failure is just a sad word. Even if we can say, let's love failure, it still resonates negatively in people's brains. So I think at this point, what I've seen helps better is moving to a different language. So there's the language of science, which is saying, okay, we're running an experiment, and then we're going to get data back. And that data is going to be useful to make a decision about what the next experiment is. And it's not about failure. It's about constantly learning and getting smarter. The other one that's kind of interesting to do is think of it as a gambler. Just recently returned to Annie Duke's wonderful Thinking in Bets. And so you're going to go in and you're going to bet on some action. How likely do you think it's going to work? What percentage confidence do I have in it? And so if you're always making bets, you want to think about how much you're going to bet, how many hours of people's work. And that is just a mental model that's not about success or failure, but trying to make my bets safer.
Well, was that a book you just said? Danny Dukes, did you say?
Annie?
Annie.
Yeah,
Duke.
She's a professional poker player.
Really? Okay.
And the book is called Thinking in Bets. Yeah.
So was it, when you read it, was there an application that you sent towards business? And
oh my God, the whole thing is very much about business. One of the biggest points in it is that we're all gambling all the time, and we should be thinking about those gambles and bets. Like every time you tell somebody to work on a project, you're making a bet, right? You're using their time that you pay for, and you're hoping for a certain return back. And then, am I playing 21? Am I playing roulette? What are the odds that this is going to turn out the way I want it to? So with that mental model, sometimes you're going to do a very daring bet, a big bet maybe, where you're going to try something sort of radical, but the return looks really high. Other times you're going to be like, okay, there's no real reason to do this. We're not getting anything back out of it. It's a very cool mindset.
Well, guess what book I'm going to be picking up as soon as we hang up
We're
here.
big readers here at Braincell.
Yeah, Readers, Audible. Everybody gets a copy of Audible or a subscription to Audible. And we want to encourage book clubs. And so I would say for me, and it's taken me 30 years to get here. I always tell folks I'm the tortoise, not the hare. But, we did this without any financing. It's all bootstrapped over the 14-year period, a 30-year period. And everybody, it's truly 30 years. It wasn't 14 on the way I said that. It's not a slip. So I'm coming off script here a little bit. What are the top 3 books you like that you would like?
Gosh.
Yeah, top 3.
It's top 300.
No, 3. Yeah, I know. I understand. But if you had to go with top 3, would Annie be in there or no?
Oh God, yeah, definitely. I'm a behavioral economic junkie. I love knowing why people do things. So yes, Thinking in Bets I think is terrific. She brings in a lot of behavioral science explanations about why we bet the way we bet. I love Thinking Fast and Slow, of course. My God, Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky just did such extraordinary work teaching us that humans are not rational whatsoever.
Okay.
Saying a third one. There's just so many. There's so many.
I know.
The Gift of Imperfection by Brene Brown. That one.
That'll resonate here. Brene Brown's a big. The Gift of Imperfection. Everybody, I hope the listeners are writing this down because, again, everything that I think I've done here has been based on reading. And again, even though it's the tortoise, not the hare, I really believe I've gotten my master's degree, because I don't have a master's, I have a bachelor's, and my doctoral through reading. And I've injected the ideas, as our team, through the readings that we all do together. We've injected a lot of the stuff that we learn through the element of reading. So I'd love hearing about things you've enjoyed to take in.
I have to add one more just because I feel so bad. I forgot. The Fearless Organization.
Fearless
Organization by Amy Edmondson. That is the psychological safety book by the person who coined the term, the person who did all the original research. It's a terrific book if you want to learn more about how to create psychological safety.
Great.
Since it was a theme.
And in your position, have you met these authors?
Not Brene Brown. I have talked with Amy Edmondson.
Okay. Okay. And at Stanford, do you teach certain classes?
Yes, I do. I teach in the human-computer interaction department. I teach product management and design, but interaction design, not so much visual design.
And so is there an element of artificial intelligence in what you're doing today?
It comes up, trust me. I mean, there's no way to avoid it. It's everywhere. But right now, one of the biggest worries, of course, is people using it for cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say on the record, it's terrible for cheating. It lies to itself. But for coding, it's actually fairly capable. So it's an ongoing concern.
I see.
About how do we make sure? We're all sort of trying to learn its voice, though. It has a certain tone, and you start recognizing it.
I get a feeling in the market right now that a lot of maybe mid-market companies, mid-enterprise, perhaps less enterprise, I don't know why I'm segmenting, they're waiting on the sideline on investments thinking that there's going to be a big shoe that drops that's going to be AI silver bullet. What do you think?
I don't think it's going to be an AI silver bullet, but it is going to get better and better and better over time. But it does some pretty impressive things now. I think playing with these toys is always a good idea. Just, going and having a conversation with it on OpenAI. I think any leader should put aside a little bit of time to goof around because it often leads to great ideas.
We use it quite a bit, I think, in Perplexity, ChatGPT. We're playing around with Copilot. So we're doing a lot of that work. And what we're trying to figure out is there a way to really help our clients get outcome through some of these AI, I'll call it modalities. I don't know if that's the right word or not. But yeah, I find it very interesting and we are very curious. Well, listen, I want to thank you for your time today. And Sarah, did you have any other questions for Christina?
I think maybe final question. Are there any trends that you're seeing maybe or changes in the workforce that are influencing the future of OKRs? I'm thinking in my head, I'm thinking about this idea of a hybrid workplace where people are now not all physically in the office. Does that have any impact?
I think that OKRs are really useful because they create alignment, which can be very powerful if you have people working at home in a hybrid state. I think having that shared clarity, it makes it easier to have higher levels of autonomy. And the other thing is if you're working hybrid where people come together, say 1 week out of every month, that sort of rhythm, you might think about being the week where you grade your old OKRs and set your new ones as the in-person thing. Because I think it's much easier to be open and honest if you're in person. When it's over Zoom, it's very easy to cheat and lie. And I don't know why, but it's not as real.
Great. Thank you.
So are there any guys my age who are coming into Stanford these days?
Yes, actually, Stanford has a program for people who have retired to start taking classes again.
Is it online or in person?
It's in person. But what I would recommend if you're curious, because I like to do small bets first to work my way up.
Yeah.
Stanford Continuing Studies has a huge online, community, sort of a...
we know what you mean. Online educational forum or something? Is that what you mean?
That's not formally through... It's Stanford's Continuing Studies. There we go.
A continuing education kind of thing like Harvard has extension schools and...
Exactly. So I've took amazing classes through the Stanford Continuing Education. I managed to take a class on food writing from Julia Child's editor. It's always surprising to me, the amazing people who teach at Stanford Continuing Education. So I would pop on there and pick a class or two. There's good stuff.
But if I wanted to apply as a regular student, you could help me get in?
No, I have no power.
You have no power. You would support my effort?
The best thing, yes, I would definitely support your effort. The best thing I can do is give you an A.
Well, that would be awesome. Of course, I would be using ChatGPT all the time. And because you mentioned that cheating, it's bad for it, but now I know it's a trick to it. And then last question, outlandish dreams. I saw something written here in my notes. Before we leave, your final thoughts on pursuing outlandish dreams and making them a reality. That hit me. Is there something that resonates with you about that?
Absolutely. We often think that things are impossible or out of our reach or just couldn't do it. I can't tell you how many people who said, I would love to travel there. I'm like, okay, so book a flight and travel there. I mean, I know that there's finance questions, but sometimes you can even work your way around that. Like, what if I actually try to save up for this? And if you have outlandish dreams and you care very much about it and something you really want for yourself, I think you should really work it through and see if there's a way to make it happen. And sometimes it's outside influence, but sometimes it's just you. You're the one who's stopping it. There want that to be.
I think in there lies some form of manifestation, which may not be what everybody thinks. I mean, some people think the universe can help manifest the dream, and maybe it's you, that is the universe, that's stopping it. But we here at BrainCell do annual dream meetings, so I thought that was an interesting thing. I want people to have dreams, right? To use the entity to help them get to where they want to go, whatever that dream might be. So I think that's a great way to bring this to a conclusion, unless you have something to say about that.
No, dream big, but plan your steps and learn on the way.
Right. Dream big, though. I do think dreaming big is important, because you got to be a little uncomfortable getting uncomfortable. Well, Christina, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I want to thank you for being our guest today. And they can find you on LinkedIn, right? Christina Wodtke. Wodtke. I say it right again, or no?
Wodtke.
And find you there on LinkedIn. Are you doing any project work, private work for companies? Are you available for work?
I really don't do a lot of that with the full time, but I do have an online course on Maven on OKRs.
Oh, you do? Oh, tell us about that before we go, so that people know that there's an online course on Maven.
Yes. And so the best way to find out about it is probably just to sign up for my newsletter on Elegant Hack. And then when there's going to be a cohort coming out, I will announce it.
So Elegant Hack is your website?
Yeah, it's a domain I got way back in 2000, believe it or not. And I started blogging on it and have been for the last 24 years. So Elegant Hack, originally it came from an engineering advice I got. A friend of mine said, you can use hacks, but make sure they're elegant hacks, not skanky hacks.
Okay.
I should have gotten Skanky Hack as well, but I didn't.
That's too bad.
Later, I thought about hack writers, and since I'm a writer, and I'm like, Elegant Hack, it's still a good name for me.
And I keep having other questions. And you also were at an arts college?
I did. I went to school, to an art school, and I taught at an art school before I started teaching at Stanford.
And what was the specific interest in arts? Where is that interest? What is it? Is it music? Is it arts?
No, it's mostly painting and photography.
Oh, okay.
Very interested in how we grab memories, but I don't do a lot of that these days. Most of my creativity goes to my work with my students.
Well, Christina, you're a very interesting person, and I could ask questions. It's going to be tough to edit this down to 20 minutes, but I could go on and on. And again, I want to thank you. So, folks, eleganthack.com. Get on the newsletter, go to Maven. I don't even know Maven as one of the learning sites, so I have to go look myself, but there's a OKR, that course that Christina puts out. She's on LinkedIn. Look her up. And we want to thank you very much for being here with us today. Sarah, thank you for being my lovely co-host. I don't know if I can say lovely. I'm not sure what I can say or can't say anymore, but I'm going to say it, lovely. And Brian Anderson, thank you for producing. And I'm going to give credit to Sam Ward, who does our music. As my son, he's a professional musician. That's why I asked about the arts. And you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are found. So thank you. This is Growth Enablement Madness, and I'm Jim Ward, CEO of BrainCell, a growth enablement company. Thank you for listening to this episode of Growth Enablement Madness podcast. I also want to thank Divinio Podcast for this episode's production and distribution. Finally, thank you to Sam Ward for our musical introduction and outro. Be sure to check out all of our episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. New episodes are available monthly and cover all important topics for growing and scaling your business. Until next time, this is Jim Ward signing off. Let's grow.